Hey guys, and welcome to my first Pokemon related video. Today I'm going to be sharing the story of my first Surpriselocke ever. Just a quick heads up, this video is predominantly for personal use, and I didn't realize I wanted to make it until after I had completed Surpriselocke, so the visual content here will be lacking, and I'm well aware that might turn some people off. By this I mean I don't really have any footage from the actual playthrough. Everything I have is either from after the fact, and mostly just screenshots and just random battles throughout the endgame. If that bothers you, feel free to either click off the video or just listen to it on the side for some background noise, as I still think it's a pretty interesting journey and worth a listen. Otherwise, from here on out, I'll explain the rule set and why I decided to do this type of run, before getting into a more formal type of storytelling. I'll post a time on the screen if you want to skip all the stuffing and just get straight into it. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy. So first off, I'll explain why I decided this kind of run would be a fun one to do. My friend and I originally were just craving some sort of Pokemon gameplay while we wait for Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl to come out. I mentioned it would be fun to do a challenge run of some sort, and he brought up the Surpriselocke. Now, if you don't know what that is, I'll get into it during the rules segment. Besides that, I have tried Nuzlockes on Shield before and quit them. This kind of irked me as I really enjoyed them prior to giving up on them for one reason or another, but this time we have a small bet with each other, the winner being whoever loses less Pokemon throughout the run. So I have incentive to complete it, and to do well. Also, I generally like being forced to use Pokemon I would normally avoid at all cost, or use as Pokedex fodder. It opens up a vast majority of the game you would otherwise never experience, and makes you play around different strengths and weaknesses. A Surpriselocke is perfect for this, as you get a nice mix of awful Pokemon and great Pokemon you may have never paid any mind to. Lastly, I mentioned briefly how this video was more for personal use. What I meant by that is I want to compare this to any challenge runs I attempt in the future, and see how I improve. I learned a lot through this playthrough, and I want to make sure that knowledge is retained. Now, with that out of the way, let's move on to the rules. So to describe what a Surpriselocke, formerly known as Wonderlock, is, I think it would be easier to explain what a Nuzlocke is first. A Nuzlocke is a challenge that usually contains the following rules. You can only catch the first Pokemon you encounter every route. If it escapes, dies, or anything else happens to it besides being caught, too bad, it's gone forever. Secondly, if a Pokemon in your party faints for any reason, it is considered dead and is no longer usable. It must either be deposited into a death box, as I'll refer to it from here on out, or released. Generally, there's a third rule where you must name all your Pokemon, as to get more attached to them in case you lose one, but I don't really have that option here. The reason for this is because the surprise twist on Surpriselocke means I have to surprise trade away any Pokemon I obtain. This includes the starter, and you cannot rename traded Pokemon. Another rule, usually included, is duplicate clause, or dupes clause, meaning that if you find a Pokemon of the same evolutionary line, you can retry for another Pokemon on that route, so you have some variety in your party. In our rules, this did not apply. I thought it would be more fun getting a slew of the same Pokemon and add to the challenge. It wasn't. In the place of dupes clause, we made it so we can catch one fishing encounter and one land encounter per route. Next time I do this challenge, I will remove this rule in favor of dupes clause being active. This way, deaths are more influential, and there will be less of an abundance of Pokemon all around. We also played with a non-overleveling rule. The way this works is no Pokemon can outlevel the current gym leader's ace before starting the gym itself, not just the gym leader fight. The reason I did it this way becomes clear as the game progresses, and honestly, we wanted to have an equal amount of fun and challenge, and I think this did the trick fairly well. This rule also counted towards any overleveled Pokemon we received from the surprise trades. This means we would have to trade them away again as many times as it took if they overleveled the current gym leader's ace. So in addition to these rules, I made some extra rules that are also slightly less important to the video, but they played a factor during the playthrough, so I'll mention them briefly. So we must play on set battle style, because otherwise the game would just be a breeze. You can also trade an NPC for another surprise trade, meaning that if you found the Pokemon in the wild that the NPC requested, you could give it to them for an extra encounter, essentially. And if you encounter a very powerful Pokemon in the wild area, it does not count as that area's encounter. Also, losing a Pokemon to it because you failed to run away does not count either. This is to prevent accidental and unfair losses of not just Pokemon, but to also lead to more trades. So with all that out of the way, let's finally get to the fun stuff. I made a new profile on my Switch and named him Surprise. Bought a month of Nintendo Live, or whatever it's called, so I could actually do the trading, and started by naming myself Surpriselocke, and I was surprised it fit. So I spammed accept, and oops. Yeah, this made me kind of feel like an idiot to everyone I traded with. Anyway, my starter was Grookey, since he was the only one I had never picked before, and it's not like I was going to keep him anyway. This turned out to be a much better decision than I realized at the time, but we'll get into that down the road. I caught and traded away all the catches from the first few routes and got a Stuffle, Charmander, and Larvesta, as well as some other stuff. I'll just show all of what I got throughout the run because I don't remember exactly what was obtained and when. That's something I'll keep track of next time probably. I'll keep the death box hidden for now though, since we'll get to those as they come. I was super excited for Larvesta because it's something I never used before, and I knew it was solid. Until I found out it doesn't evolve until level 59, and I'd be practically done with the game by then. Charizard was obviously going to be very helpful, so that was a solid take, but I hate Stuffle and everything about it, even though it knew Thrash and Superpower, 120 base power moves. I made my way to the wild area and caught everything I could to exchange there. Started training my Stuffle on things I thought he was super effective against, like Pancham, which is when he died to Arm Thrust. I didn't really care since this is probably my least favorite Pokemon ever, besides the fact this had already contributed to my death total. This will come back to haunt me though, because as you may have noticed, there are very few fighting types I received, and even less that survived. And they're in pretty high demand. Anyway, I progressed onward, training up my fire types and weak and defenseless bugs like Metapod in the wild area for the grass gym, being very precautious so I didn't lose anything else I needed so early on. This is when I slowly started drifting away from Charmander and toward Litten, because I found out Incineroar is part Dark type, which I knew would come in handy for beat Psychic types in the early to mid game. Plus, I never really used him before, and I thought it would be a nice change of pace. I romped through Galar Mine 1, Route 3 and 4, and finally reached Turffield. My Pokemon were on the brink of overleveling though, so I had to switch them out constantly as I went. This, in turn, led to a powerful starter team and second string squad that would aid in type variety and over-leveling prevention as the game progressed. As you probably assumed, I sliced through this grass gym with ease, reaching Milo and ending his team with a single Max Flare on each Glossifleur and Eldegoss. Route 5 was a breeze as well, as I made my way towards Nessa and Hullberry. I knew this would be an easy sweep for my Ivysaur, as I had been using him avidly to catch any new encounters I came across, and he's 4 times super effective against Nessa's ace, Dreadnought. But instead of this, I decided I would likely need an all-important electric type on my team at some point. So I took my only electric type, Yamper, training instead, and brought him as my main into the gym, with Ivysaur as a backup just in case. To my surprise, Yamper did pretty well here, despite his dismal stats, and he even evolved mid-gym into Boltund, which obviously didn't hurt my odds. When it came to Nessa's team though, it was a joke, as expected, and it was easily swept through with Boltund's electric and Ivysaur's grass moves. On my way out of town though, I remembered you could fish on the docks near the lighthouse, so I made my way over there for an extra encounter and found Basculin. At first I didn't think anything of it, but after about 15 balls thrown at it without it shaking a single time, this little bastard started to tick me off. I looked it up and apparently Basculin has a 12.7% catch rate. I don't know if that's entirely accurate, because I found other sources that stated it had a lower catch rate than Reshiram. Needless to say, I didn't catch that little prick. Fortunately, this is one of the few outliers, as I caught almost every other encounter I came across besides this one. Heading through Galar Mine 2 and Motostoke outskirts was also nothing special. Speed was once again made short work of with my Dottler's bug moves and various Pokemon with Bite. There were no other trainers that really posed a memorable threat besides him. Once I finished off the rest of the trainers in the mine and outskirts, I made my way back to Motostoke, and I was ready to take on the fire gym with a Magikarp I had groomed into the fearsome Gyarados. I was still cautious though, as I had lost Gyarados to one unlucky hit in previous Nuzlocke attempts. Emphasis on attempts. So as a backup, I brought one of the first Pokemon I had obtained from a trade, the woefully bad and personally disliked Sudowoodo. It doesn't help that it is also my least favorite typing, but regardless, I liked its coverage for this gym, as I knew it would resist every Pokemon I would face, and would be quadruple super effective against Centiskorch, Kabuze's. This was yet another gym I swept through with ease because of my good and somewhat lucky type coverage so far, but I promise this good luck does not last much longer. After beating these 3 gyms, I had unlocked the path to Hammerlock, which is accessible through the rest of the wild area I had yet to venture. This was home to a slew of strong Pokemon, and a whole heap of new surprise trades waiting to be snagged just for me. This is where the majority of my not gonna use you box was filled, as I was already happy with my team, and most Pokemon I got from these trades from here on out weren't fantastic. I proceeded to take the increased wild Pokemon levels as an opportunity to gain some extra XP while training. One of the Pokemon I used when Ivysaur wasn't available to sleep powder something that I wanted to catch was Dratini, since it knew Thunder Wave. Unfortunately, this would be the last time I'd ever train this Dratini, as it died to a freaking Pumpkaboo. Yes, you heard me right, a Pumpkaboo. I never cared for this ghost pumpkin, but now I have a personal grudge against it, as it connected on 2 consecutive 5-hit bullet seeds, killing my baby pseudo-legendary with ease. The good news, though, was I had received another Dratini in a surprise trade, and I knew getting Dragonite was not in my near future. So I brushed off the loss, and I continued on to train Dartrix here instead. Rowlet was something I had never used, but after learning Decidueye was a Ghost Grass hybrid, I figured this would be a good replacement if anything happened to Ivysaur, and would also benefit me as a backup against the Ghost Gym. After scouting the areas around me for something safe and suitable to train on, I decided Toxicroak would be a valid option for fast and easy training, as they were plentiful and weak to Dartrix's flying type moves. The problem with this is that Toxicroak was level 46, and Dartrix was level 32. Toxicroak barely survived a pluck, hit me with a super effective Sludge Bomb that I had failed to consider it having, and that was the end of my Dartrix. This one stung a bit. I respected that I deserved this loss, but I started to bond with that Gracial, and now my plan and substitute for Ivysaur was ruined. Anyways, after this I retreated to Hammerlock and started heading west to the first gym I was actually genuinely afraid to battle, Gym 4, Stow-on-Side. Traveling through Route 6 was fun, but also worrying. It's my favorite route in the game in terms of wild Pokemon, aesthetic, and layout, but a nuisance with the trainers. I remember specifically struggling here on a separate Nuzlocke and losing some Pokemon to the dual trainers on that route. They have good type coverage, so I prepared for them accordingly. I believe the Pokemon were Ponyard and Togetic. As pathetic as it sounds to be concerned about, they cover each other perfectly. And obviously Nuzlocks are a scary endeavor, especially when you know you're exposing your Pokemon to something super effective against it. Come to think of it, most of the trainers on this route were intimidating, but I didn't realize until I was already in the battles just how bad it was. There's one trainer with a beefy Clefairy and tanky Clefable, which only know Metronome, a battle where all you do is hold your breath and pray for a good roll. A trainer with Throw who annoyingly spams Circle Throw, constantly dragging out different Pokemon that are usually weak to it, of course. And another with Coughing that knows the terrifying move for Nuzlocke, Self-Destruct. As far as I can remember, this is the only route that really required planning and strategy. Fortunately, even though I was hit by all my worst nightmares on this route, I came out victorious and deathless, and continued on to the Ghost-type gym in Stow-on-Side. The reason I was so worried about this gym is because I had single-handedly ruined 2 of my Nuzlocke attempts in the past. More specifically, G-Max Gengar ruined them. In my past attempts, the Pokemon that preceded Gengar ruined my efforts to set up on them, notably Yamask with Disable and the Cursula with Curse. But this time, I had something I didn't have previously, Incineroar. The trainers throughout the gym were nothing to write home about, and were all butchered by Crunch with Gyarados. But the thought of Alistair made me shudder. Fortunately, Incineroar and his Dark-type stab-boosted Darkest Lariat was sweeping with ease. I believe the only one that survived more than one turn was the Mimikyu, thanks to Disguise, but that couldn't do too much offensively. Even the fearsome Gengar was destroyed in a single max Darkness from my Dynamaxed Incineroar, which left me quite surprised. This is when I knew Incineroar had to be a permanent part of my team, and not just a backup to Charizard. With the 4th gym badge under my belt, I was ready to take on the joke of a gym in Balanea, since I had a secret weapon up my sleeve, Metang. Traveling through another of my favorite routes, Glimwood Tangle, dealing with a few trainers there, I realized I had a slight problem on my hands that would trouble me for the remainder of my playthrough. My Pokemon were dangerously close to overleveling. I had to once again switch out my Pokemon regularly, as to prevent them from being unusable in the Fairy Gym, specifically my rather important Metal-type pseudo-legendary Metang. This was one of the biggest challenges of this playthrough, battling my own rule of overleveling. This is why I emphasized, as long as you start the gym at the same level of the Ace or lower, you are safe. All of the gyms in this game are strangely close in level. Besides the 3rd and the 4th gym, only a couple mere levels separate each gym leader's Ace, which usually by the time I beat the gym, my main 6 were already nearing this limit. This required a lot of use of my backups, which in turn led to a developing team of third stringers. This was pretty cool though, as I have never played a Pokemon game training multiple groups of essential Pokemon all at the same time, alongside my main 6. It really wasn't bothersome either, as the XP shared for beating Pokemon around my level constantly was generous. After traversing the short route of Glimwood Tangle and taking care not to overlevel anything, I had arrived at Balanea. Thankfully, only Venusaur had overleveled and was unable to partake in the gym fight. This was no bother though, as I really had no use for him in this particular gym. I knew all of the answers to Opal's ridiculous questions from previous playthroughs, so I received all of the buffs to help sweep the gym's trainers prior to taking on the leader alone. When Opal decided it was her turn, she led with Wheezing, which against Metang stood no chance. For Mawile, I switched out to Charizard and ruined its day with a flamethrower or two. Next up was Togekiss, which also ate some of Metang's steel without much of a fight, followed up by the G-Max Ace, Alcremie. I max steel spiked the Alcremie, leaving it with red health. It retaliated with a G-Max Finale, restoring a small amount of HP, but not enough. Another steel spike and it was over. I didn't expect much of a challenge from this gym, though, so the victory wasn't as sweet as it was in Stow-on-Side. But at least I could move on to the next gym. Upon leaving Balanea, I received the TM Draining Kiss, which I knew would come in handy for the Mawile I had been training up. I returned to Hammerlock and was ready to venture east towards the Ice Gym. Route 8 is a relatively lengthy but unique and interesting route that didn't pose much of a threat to anything I had. I made my way to the second half of the route as it transformed into a winter wonderland and into the snowy city of Circhester, ready for the Ice Gym. The only thing I feared here, besides the obnoxious gym challenge of traversing the ice with the magnetic pole things, was Melanie's Lapras. Fortunately, since ice types are absolutely awful, and I had a solid amount of fire coverage from Incineroar and Charizard, rock coverage from Sudowoodo, and now fighting coverage from Phalanx, this gym was an immemorable breeze. Moving on down to Route 9, I received the water mod for the bike, hunted down all the items and trainers, and moved on to the dark type gym of Spikemouth. This was a gym I was never really worried about, despite the solid type coverage on Piers' team. My plan was to have Corviknight to deal with Scrafty, Mawile to take care of the Malamar, and Phalanx to deal with the rest, along with Incineroar, who now knew Cross Chop to take care of any issues Phalanx encountered. As usual, the gym trainers were all a waste of time, and they were easily O-code with Phalanx. Making my way through Piers' Pokemon was easy as well, and I started to get a little cocky. For one reason or another, I ended up sending out Incineroar against Obstagoon instead of Phalanx. Probably because he was fully healed, and I figured a 4-time super effective Cross Chop would be sufficient enough to one-hit the Obstagoon. Unfortunately, I was wrong. Cross Chop hit the Obstagoon into near red HP, which at first I was satisfied with, until I saw him use Counter. And all I could do was sit bug-eyed and watch in horror as the health sapped away from my precious Incineroar. This was the worst loss of the run for me, as I had grown attached to the Incineroar and its unique typing and great move pool. From the beginning onward, each loss had progressively gotten worse and worse for me, and to my great distress, it wasn't going to end there. But for now, at least, the Dark Gym had, taking with it one of the only Pokemon I genuinely wanted to carry to the end of the game. On my way back to Hammerlock, I realized this is nearly as far as I had gotten in any Nuzlocke attempt. Raihan had not concerned me in prior attempts, probably because I had nothing to lose. But this time around, I knew something would be different, despite having solid coverage for its dragon types in Mawile and Cryogonal. Because of what had just happened to Incineroar, this is where I began researching not just the gym leaders' Pokemon, but their learn sets as well, so I knew what to expect. The challenge of this gym was to deal with the 3 trainers before Ryan in double battles. The first battle of Pelipper and Sliggoo were nothing spectacular, as Gyarados and his Ice Fang made short work of them. Next up was Ninetales and Turtonator. Those posed more of a threat because I could never remember what typing Turtonator was, and I knew Ninetales was a special defense powerhouse. Unfortunately, Ninetales' ability was Drought, so my waterfall with Gyarados did far less than I was hoping for. My other Pokemon was Mawile, because I figured Fairy would counter the dragon aspect that I believed Turtonator was. Of course, in retrospect, this was an awful idea, since it was now a Steel type against 2 Sunlight boosted Fire types. And just like that, Flamethrower made short work of my beloved Mawile. This death also stung me to the core. I never had a Mawile before, and it's one of those Pokemon I always struggled to remember its typing and thought it was pretty cool. This also meant I was about to take on the Dragon-type gym leader without my best and only Dragon-immune Fairy-type Pokemon. All of this could have been avoided if I just could find what Pokemon and moves the gym trainers had online, but for some reason, while doing the playthrough, I could not. So I paid the price. Anyway, the following battle of Abomasnow and Hakamoa were a sweep, and I was ready for the gym leader Ryan. The first time you fight Ryan is also a double battle, which I had failed to remember, so this slightly boggled my plans. I couldn't send out Gyarados, my best Pokemon for this gym, since it would get romped by Flygon's Thunder Punch, and I was worried Venusaur wouldn't last long against Sandaconda's Fire Fang. Not to mention, all of the Pokemon have at least one super effective move against Cryogonal, also making him useless. This gym had obnoxiously perfect type coverage. No matter what I sent out, it wouldn't last long if I didn't OHKO and outspeed everything, which I did not have faith in. To be honest, I don't remember exactly what I used here. I believe it was Venusaur and Phalanx for the initial fight to take out Flygon so I could switch into Gyarados in place of Venusaur. At least looking back at it, that's what I would have done, since Flygon is the only threat to Gyarados. I know after this I Dynamaxed Gyarados so I could take out Duraludon with a neutral typing, but this was also a mistake since Duraludon knew Max Rockfall, and the only thing super effective against Duraludon are ground and fighting, so I should have just Dynamaxed Phalanx instead. One of the typings I didn't receive even a single one of throughout my entire playthrough was ground, which really sucked since it would have been very handy here, especially with all the sandstorms. Thankfully though, I had the foresight to trigger Rain from Max Geyser the turn before Duraludon came out, which greatly weakened his Rockfall, leading to a relatively easy, albeit nerve-wracking KO within a few turns. This won me the final badge, and I was ready to push onward into the semifinals at Wyndon. But Duraludon was an intimidating ace, and this was not going to be the last time I'd lay eyes on him. I spammed through some more dialogue and took the train to Route 10, which is essentially this game's version of Victory Road, as it has an onslaught of trainers throughout. I didn't expect much to get my way here, as I was a little overleveled from the previous gym fight. Knocking off trainer after trainer, I came to one final double battle on the route. I threw out Phalanx to deal with Heliolisk, Klinklang, and Togedemaru, and Cryogonal to take care of the Noivern. I set up Light Screen and Reflect with Cryogonal, and then proceeded to take care of business. Unfortunately, however, Noivern used Hurricane on my Phalanx, which somehow OHKO'd him despite the barrier still being up. This confused and baffled me, and I was heartbroken. I think Phalanx is such a cool Pokemon, and I finally had a reason to use one. But worst of all, it was a staple of offense on my team, being my one and only leveled up fighting type, and I was going to be battling a lot of people who had Pokemon weak to fighting in the tournament. I needed to think of something fast, as I had been losing great assets to my team at an alarming rate. My team, which was once comprised of depth and talent in nearly every regard, was dangerously low on substitutes. Remember, this is a huge issue for obvious reasons, as well as the fact I was still battling the possibility of overleveling my Pokemon and risking not being able to use them for the semifinals. I dragged out some Pokemon from my trash box and started to level them up as backups. This included an Arctozolt, Rillaboom, and Dreadnought. I also had to dive into 2 of the 5 EVs I had received through the surprise trades because I knew they'd be reliable, as well as Riolu, so I had a fighting type. The obnoxious bit about this was I wanted an Umbreon, Sylveon, and Lucario, which were all friendship evolutions. So I hopped into a camp, fed and played with them for about 20 minutes until they were ready to evolve, and finally felt comfortable with my team once again. I just needed to level all of them up sufficiently, which was becoming a grind since they were all level 1, and needed to be upwards of level 50 to be of any use to me. This is when I found the glitch involving the Pokejobs and advancing time to level up huge groups of Pokemon very quickly. I figured this would be a fair exploit as long as I told my opponent about it, and also since it really doesn't do anything but save me a lot of time. So I proceeded to level them up, teach them the moves I wanted them to have, and finally advanced on towards the city of Wyndon. Before we progress further, I wanted to dedicate a section to how the semifinals will be level controlled. Because the semifinals are obviously not gyms, I had to make an impromptu structure for the leveling issue. So the rules are the same as before, but they will follow this level variation as I progress. Oleana's ace is 52, so you cannot use any Pokemon above that level before starting the semifinals. These fights will count as her gym. After that, Ryan's finals ace is 55, so anything past 55 at the end of the Oleana fight is not usable until after Ryan is beaten. After him is Chairman Rose with an ace of 57, so nothing past level 57 can be used before beating Rose. This is followed by Eternatus, who is level 60. Again, anything exceeding level 60 before the Eternatus fight cannot be used until after he is defeated. This leaves the final fight to complete the Surpriselocke, the champion Leon, whose Charizard is level 65. So as long as your Pokemon don't surpass level 65, you are free to use them for this fight. In hindsight, this is something I should have accounted for beforehand, since it made the leveling issue very prevalent, and more of a factor than the fights themselves sometimes. Not to say I didn't have fun or it wasn't a good challenge regardless, but I was constantly overleveling throughout the endgame here, and it could have been done better. Anyway, before starting the semifinals, I remembered I could return to the wild area with my surfing bike to get a couple more encounters from places I couldn't reach before. So I headed back there to finish up some of my last remaining encounters for the game. I rode over to the Lake of Outrage and encountered yet another hailstorm. I spotted a Vanillix and figured this would be an easy capture, but not for Venusaur, too risky. Instead, I absent-mindedly sent in the backup Dragonair to paralyze it. Once again, this proved futile, as my Dragonair was 14 levels under the Vanillix, and it O-coded me with Blizzard. This was my own fault, so I can't really say much more than that. I often focus so much on offense that I forget to account for defensive typing matchups, so I end up getting a bit like right here. Fortunately, I didn't really need Dragonair or Dragonite, since I had already received multiple Dreepies, so this was an acceptable loss. After a few more captures and trades, I returned to Winden to take on the remainder of the game. My first opponent in the semifinals was Marnie. Unfortunately, I had overleveled my Lucario to 56 during the exploit, so I wasn't going to be able to use him for anything until I beat Ryan again. Instead, this was the first taste of action for my Sylveon, who I'd switch out for Orbeetle when Toxicroak and Scrafty came out, since Bug is good against Dark. Yet again, I failed to account for the Dark types being super effective against Orbeetle's Psychic typing, so after sweeping her first 3 Pokemon with ease, her Morpeko came out, and killed my Orbeetle with a single critical bite. This is more annoying than anything, since I mostly just used Orbeetle to set up barriers for tougher fights, and I really didn't need to lose another Pokemon here. Finally though, Grimmsnarl met the Steel Spikes from Metagross, and the fight was ended. Next up was the bitch boy Hop, who I haven't mentioned at all in this playthrough because to no one's surprise, he's a joke. Seriously, the toughest part of every encounter with him was the double using Cotton Guard, which just made him obnoxiously bulky. That, or I kept accounting for Cinderace, when in reality he had Inteleon. I decided to bring back Bolton for this fight, as he hadn't seen any real action in a while, and he was expendable. But to my surprise and delight, he cut through all of them with relative ease. It was nice that he had the ability Strong Jaw too, so his bites and crunches were essentially stab boosted, making him slightly more likable. That's pretty much all I have to say about Hop's fight, so let's move on to someone ever so slightly less likable, Oleana. After heading back to the hotel and roasting Hop in an interview, we play the cringiest game of hide-and-go-seek the world has ever seen with Macrocosmos' Eric, who gives you a few signs of what's to come when you enter Winden Tower with all of his steel types. He gets destroyed all 3 times with ease by Charizard, and it's onto the tower to beat Oleana. I get stopped at the elevator by some pussy with a Durant that gets demolished, and proceed to go up the endless elevator. Charizard continued to scorch everything in his path, clearing the way with no issues at all. The worst part was watching Hop's double do pitiful damage against steel types with its normal type moves. Anyway, once we find Oleana, I discover she has a solid variety of Pokemon. Instead of switching out constantly, I end up using a run favorite of mine, Umbreon, another Pokemon I had no experience with prior to this run. If you check his move pool, I basically just made him a setup machine, with Baton Pass to hand the boosts over to whoever I wanted when the time arrived. I put Frostlass to sleep, and proceeded to use 6 curses to max my attack and defense. Assurance then made short work of the Frostlass, and it was time to Baton Pass over to Metagross, who absolutely devastated everything in his way with a +6 boost to his attack. Oleana was defeated, and I could go back to the finals to end the run. After returning to the Winden Stadium, I was interrupted by Bede. This time, Bede was back with some dual Fairy Psychic types, which is slightly more annoying than his predominantly Psychic team. I once again sent out Metagross to stomp through everything, and so he did. Metagross was the one Pokemon I was almost not worried about losing at all. He would simply eat all damage that came his way, and giving him leftovers made it just plain unfair. This is another Pokemon I really never felt like I used enough in the past, but I adored using him through this playthrough as a safety net in almost every situation. A mixture of Max Steel Spikes and Meteor Mash made short work of almost all of Bede's team, and so it was back to the regularly scheduled broadcast. Next up was Nessa's improved water team, starting off with Golisopod. I decided once again it was time to give Boltund another chance, since I rarely got to use electric types during this run. Hitting Golisopod made it cower and run away, Pelipper got devastated by a 4-time super effective Spark, Barraskewda and Seaking tasted a Wild Charge for good measure, and Golisopod was finished after I Dynamaxed Boltund, preparing for Dreadnought. It was at this point I figured Boltund had lived for far too long. I mean, how did this boring trash can survive almost my entire run? I didn't heal him from Wild Charge, recoil damage, and he was almost dead. So I gave him one chance to prove himself, and OHKO G-Max Dreadnought. The Max Lightning struck, Dreadnought's health fell into red, and it lived. This was the end of Boltund, which if you couldn't tell, I didn't care at all. Since I was a bit spiteful, something I didn't like made it this far into the game, and most of the things I loved did not. You can just feel how bad Boltund and Yamper's stats are just by using them. I mean, besides speed, I guess. He didn't deserve to be there when I beat Leon. Plus, I had that Arctozolt trained up just in case. I'm not sure how much better that really is, since I never got to use him, but it was cool to have anyway. Dreadnought was aptly dealt with by Venusaur, and it was on to Alistair yet again. This time, I didn't have my Incineroar to destroy his whole team, and he had a fairly significant upgrade across the board now too. But fortunately, I was prepared with Umbreon. Once again, I set up plenty of curses, and was ready for my reduced speed assurance to mop the floor with all the ghost types, which it mostly did. Unfortunately, only being a 10 PP move and Dusknoir knowing pressure, it didn't work exactly as I'd planned. So I had to swap out to Gyarados towards the end to use Crunch instead. But once again, Alistair was left reeling as he posed less of a threat this time than he did the first. Now to take on Raihan once more, but this time, his team was stacked. This is where things started to get intense. This was the only fight I was forced to prepare for a genuinely long time. I spent upwards of 1 to 2 hours panning every situation that I could out in my mind. The reason for this is because his team is surprisingly diverse, at least in terms of moves. He utilizes weather to its absolute best offensively and defensively, and Duraludon nearly took its toll on me last time, and this time it was even better and I had even less. To make things worse, Lucario and Venusaur were both overleveled and unusable for this fight. This meant I literally had nothing super effective against his Duraludon, at least nothing that would survive the first hit and be able to get a strike back before he moved again. Seeing as Duraludon is surprisingly fast for a skyscraper, even though I didn't know it at the time. This will be relevant shortly. I was low on reliable Pokemon and couldn't retreat to train up anything new since I was already in the gym. I slowed down and took things one step at a time though, and began to plan around his Torkoal instead, which posed a huge threat of its own. Torkoal is his first Pokemon. It's extremely tanky, and I was lacking special attackers that could do any good amount of damage to the thing. My best bet was Gyarados, but Torkoal's ability was Drought, meaning my physical attacking Waterfall, which was already not going to do much because of Torkoal's physical defense, is weakened further by the harsh sunlight. I knew Torkoal would follow up by using a neutral damage, instantly charged Solar Beam, but it was literally my only option. Originally, I had what I thought to be a genius plan to use a Grookey from my trash box with a Focus Sash and Endeavor, followed by a Quick Attack or something to outspeed it and get a quick and cheesy kill. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that Endeavor was not a low priority move, so this wouldn't work, especially since Torkoal has abysmal speed, so I really couldn't do anything with that. Hence, I stuck with the Gyarados plan. After Torkoal, I figured I could get Umbreon set up on Goodra and baton pass to Gyarados after taking him out. This would lead to the inevitable OHKO of Turtonator and Flygon. Then, I could stall Duraludon out of G-Max form by switching between Corviknight and Metagross to tank the hits. All this would be followed up by the only Pokemon I had left that knew any sort of fighting move, Bisharp. So I took out Poniard and gave him some XP candies, got him to evolve into Bisharp, and gave him a Focus Sash. This would allow me to switch into Bisharp and Revenge when the time was right, inevitably killing Duraludon and saving my entire team. This was the best plan I could come with on paper, and I was ready to set it into motion. The plan went nearly perfectly. Torkoal did very negligible damage to Gyarados with a Solar Beam, and only took 3 Waterfalls to get rid of. After that, the swap to Umbreon went as planned. I put Goodra to sleep, and was able to dish out all 6 curses over the course of a couple of yawns. I assurance the Goodra down, and baton passed back to Gyarados when Turtonator arrived. Gyarados' Waterfall took care of the Turtonator yet again, and Ice Fang ended Flygon. Finally, the big boy had arrived, and it was time to set my plan into motion. Somewhere in my desperate panic, I ended up sending up Bisharp while Duraludon was G-maxed, so I had to Dynamax Bisharp instead of using Revenge as planned. He got hit on entry by the Max Rockfall targeted at my Gyarados, wounding him badly. The following turn, I was outsped and hit by a 4-time super effective Max Knuckle, which I totally forgot that Duraludon knew, inevitably leading to a kill. This royally pissed me off. I spent so long thinking everything through as vividly as possible and still managed to screw it up. I was so mad I ended up rage quitting that night, not finishing the fight. I understand this could be considered a loss or a forfeit, but to somewhat make up for it, next time I launched the game, I threw the Bisharp in the death box anyway, and restarted the fight from the very beginning without him. This time, I had a far superior plan that I had not thought of prior, a surefire way of winning. I scoured my trash box yet again for anything that could be of use, and I found it. One of the Dreepies I didn't evolve, new Curse. More importantly, this was the Ghost type Curse, not the same effect Umbreon's Curse had, just raising his stats. I knew what had to be done. I gave Dreepy a Focus Sash, knowing full well its pseudo-legendary speed would benefit me in the end. I repeated the exact steps as before, making it to Duraludon with ease yet again. This time, I made sure to switch between Corviknight and Metagross to time out his G-Max form. Once it was gone, I swapped into the Suicide Squad that was Dreepy. He tanked a hit with Focus Sash, and sacrificed his remaining 1 HP to condemn Duraludon in a Curse. Now all I had to do was wait. A mixture of potions and switching led to Duraludon's demise within 6 turns or so. Dreepy had made the ultimate sacrifice, adding another to my death total, but preventing devastation across my underprepared team. Now it was time for the final fight, Leon. But before I could get there, we were interrupted by Rose. After getting the rusted sword and shield, Hop and I returned to Hammerlock to put a halt on Rose's plans to reignite the Darkest Day. His team was an absolute joke for Charizard, but at least the music was cool. After this, I had to make my way up to battle Eternatus. This was a battle I was unsure I wanted to count, as we can't really do anything with it, and it's not a trainer. Nevertheless, it didn't matter, as Metagross once again ate up all the damage it took. And, with the help of Zacian, Zamazenta, and Hop's useless fluffy turd of a Pokemon, I was able to pointlessly catch Eternatus. Finally, I could get back to the stadium and put an end to the Surpriselocke for good. In my original playthrough of Shield, I struggled with Leon a bit at the end, as I had nothing to deal with Aegislash. But this time I was ready and confident I could end almost his entire team with just Gyarados. So I did. This battle did not require nearly as much planning, nor was it anywhere near as difficult as Ryan. After setting up on Aegislash with Umbreon one last time, I took it out with a single assurance. This of course was followed up by Baton Pass into Gyarados, as Ice Fang and Waterfall devastated everything up to Charizard, which then died to a Max Geyser. And just like that, it was over. I had kind of completed my very first Surpriselocke, losing a total of 11 Pokemon. This was an absolute riot. Probably the most fun I've ever had in a Pokemon game. This is something I highly suggest doing if you've never tried it before, and I know I'll be doing it again if Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl have surprise trades in them. It adds a lot of versatility to the game, and added an aspect of the game I've never experienced before. Through the highs and the lows, it evoked a lot of emotion out of me that's never really felt doing a basic playthrough of Pokemon, and I loved it. It also changed the way I look at a lot of Pokemon, and it was nice to see opponents as an actual threat for once instead of a waste of space. I hope you all enjoyed the story of my first successful Surpriselocke, and if I can do another one in November, you can guarantee it'll be uploaded here. And thanks for watching.